من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. What we can do is, if we those of you who don't have to lean back on the wall, bad, extremely tired, and then come a bit closer. Let me remind you of a hadith which we can benefit from in Sahih Muslim. That the Prophet ﷺ one time came into the masjid, into the mosque, and he saw the Sahaba. Some of them are sitting separately. Some of them are sitting in groups of twos and threes. Some of them may be reciting Quran. Some of them may be praying. Some of them may be sitting and reflecting. Some of them just very softly talking to each other. Some groups here, some groups there. And he said, "Ma li arakum easy. Why do I see you sitting separately?" Okay. And here, "Ma li arakum easy means mutafarriqun. Why do I see you sitting separately? The commentaries on this hadith, Imam Nawawis, in his explanations with Sahih Muslim, tells us that the Prophet ﷺ, he didn't just order, just talk about unity. He will try as much as possible, practically, to make unity happen at every level of Muslim life. From prayer in jama'ah, in congregation, to walking into the masjid, and it's permissible. There's no harm. It's not sinful to sit separately. It may not even be makruh, disliked. But the Prophet ﷺ is training the Sahaba that if you are outwardly united, it will help inward unity. And if there is inward unity, it will help outward unity. Let me move on to that point a bit more. So we have the adab of the majlis is to sit closer together where we can. When there's no majlis and we're waiting for the prayer or we just sit in the masjid, maybe we can sit differently. But once there's something specific, we try to sit as close and reasonably as possible. I'll give you another hadith in the Sunan of Abu Dawud, just to show this ijtima'i, this sense of gathering and congregation that we have. The Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in would travel. Sometimes it was for, quite often for jihad. And whenever they would travel, if it's a long travel, they would rest at certain resting points, which we would probably now call service stations. And when people would rest, just like when we get off at a service station, some of us are going for a cup of coffee, some of us going for some hot food, some of us stay in the car, some of us go to the bathroom, some of us go to the local shop to get a newspaper, whatever it be. We go different ways, and then we come back to the car. And so this used to happen with the Sahaba. Minus the shops and the coffee bars and whatever. Some of them used to go to the valley, some of them used to just sit there, some of them used to wander over there. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, "You're being disunited in these valleys and these pathways is from shaitan." They weren't disunited, they weren't upset with each other, they were just going off in their own ways. So the Sahabi who narrates this hadith, whose name I can't remember, but I vaguely recall it could be An-Nu'man ibn Bashir radiallahu anhu, but I'm probably wrong. The Sahabi who relates this says, from that time the Prophet said this, why you're being separated in these mountains and valley paths is from shaitan, is from the devil. He said, we the Sahaba, whenever we would stop on a journey with the Prophet we would be so close together that if you put a small cloth over us, it could fit over all of us. Now that doesn't mean literally they were packed in like sardines. It's just it's mubalaghatul kalam. It's an exaggeration in speech to make the point that we didn't drift away. And the reason for this is that outward unity helps inward unity. And of course inward unity helps outward unity. Which is why the Prophet ﷺ says in the well-known hadith, straighten your rows, and this is for prayer, straighten your rows, or else Allah will separate your hearts. SubhanAllah. Straighten your rows, or else Allah will separate your hearts. So there are some things, if we don't take care of outwardly, it will actually lead to inward disunity because of our disregard for an outward instruction of the Prophet. Now that's not the case all the time, but we need to be aware and wise to these things, inshallah. So adab al-majlis, whenever we can, we sit fairly close together, unless we have a reason, and there could be many reasons. Okay, we are now on the end of hadith number 2, quite a long hadith, the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, and I'll get the Shaykh just to read, our Imam to read off the last Arabic bit inshallah, to remind us. Bismillah ya Shaykh.
قال عليه الصلاة والسلام فأخبرني عن الساعة قال ما المسؤول عنها بأعلم من السائل قال فأخبرني عن أمارتها قال أن تلد الأمة ربتها وأن ترى الحفاة العراة العالة رياء الشاء يتتاولون في البنيان ثم انطلق فلبثت مليا ثم قال يا عمر أتدري من السائل قلت الله ورسوله أعلم قال فإنه جبريل أتاكم يعلمكم دينكم رواه مسلم.
MashaAllah, Imam's got MashaAllah, really good voice in even reciting just the Arabic Barakallah fikum. If I can just take that from you. Alhamdulillah. So we need to recognize the virtues and the people of virtue that we have in our community. Because if we take them for granted, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't like that. And one of the things that we Muslims are a little bit slow on is we tend not to respect, as we should, many of the Imams in our masjid. Because I am the manager of the mosque, and so I am the king. Actually, I might be the manager of the mosque, but the one who has the Quran in his heart is the one who really wears the crown. The more that we remember that, the better it is for us. Okay. So remember, we've had Akhbirni an Islam, tell me about Islam, tell me about Akhbirni an Iman, tell me about Iman, then last week Akhbirni an Ihsan, tell me about Ihsan, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. Ihsan is that you worship Allah as though you see Him, and though you may not see Him, know that He sees you. And it's all about Hadratul Ilahiyya, making hudur, trying to have hudur al-qalb. In our acts of worship, have presence of heart. That the heart feels the closeness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart feels the nearness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart feels that Allah Jalla wa Ala is with us in our acts of worship, كَأَنَّكَ تَرَى, as though we see Him. And though that is a very high station and a very hard station, then the Prophet said, so if you can't do that, then know that He sees you, so that we can still have this idea that Allah is watching us. So in our hearts there is haya, shyness, khawf, raja, mahabba, love, fear and hope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we know He's watching, hearing and seeing. And this idea of hudur al-qalb, presence of heart in acts of worship, this is the ruh, the very essence of acts of worship. As the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith which is authentic in the Sunan of Abu Dawud, perhaps a person prays and for it he gets a tenth of the reward, or a ninth, or an eighth, or a seventh, or a sixth, or a fifth, or a third, or a quarter, or a third, or a half. Meaning that he's talking about an increase in reward, or if you look at it the other way, a decrease in reward. Increase or decrease, not because of some outward mistakes. Yes, it's true, the more sunnah things that we do in the prayer and associated with the prayer, the more we'll get rewarded, no doubt, for outward sunnah. So if I maybe brush my teeth with a siwak stick just before the prayer with the intention that it's to cleanse my mouth for the prayer, even though I've done wudu already. If I perhaps try to wear white, which is the sunnah for a Muslim man to wear. If I do maybe different opening du'as other than, to try to vary the opening du'a. If I do more du'as at the end of the prayer, if I do, in the Hanafi fiqh, is it allowed to do Subhan Rabbi al-A'la more than 3 times in a fard salah? Yeah, so but as long as it's 3, 5, 7, 9, in fard salah, it's no problem. So trying to do more than 3 Subhan Rabbi al-A'la, Subhan Rabbi al-Azim, but making sure that they're odd numbers, okay? So there's more dhikr being done in the prayer, more reward. No doubt at all. Those outward things that we say and do, the more we do of them, the better rewarding it is. But there is another reward, which is that, let's just say we're doing quite a lot of the outward deeds, but if the heart isn't present, meaning the heart is distracted and it's thinking of anything and everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the reward, of course, is going to diminish. And this hadith, perhaps a person prays and for it he gets a 10th, a 9th, and 8th. It's actually referring more so to inward, the inward prayer than the outward prayer. Both are important. Which is why we don't run to the prayer. Whatever we catch, and whatever we don't, we make up for. The reason why is because we run to the prayer. It's really difficult to have hudur al-qalb, presence of heart. You've got your heart beating in your ears. You've got the sweat running off your brow. You're trying to catch your breath, so you can't even recite Fatiha. So it's very difficult to have hudur al-qalb, presence of heart like that. But if I walk to the prayer calmly, and even if I miss one rak'ah, not so slowly that I purposely miss the prayer, the rak'ahs, but I walk at a normal pace, I got to the prayer, I miss one rak'ah, not a problem. Even though all of the prayer that I catch behind the imam, I can still have presence of heart because my heart isn't as racing and all over the place. I make up the one rak'ah anyway, inshallah. It's all about presence of heart. And this is why the more we are encouraged, the more dhikr we do outside of the prayer, slowly and steadily, maybe just inch by inch, every day, every week, our hearts become more and more filled by Allah's grace with hudur al-qalb, presence of heart, so that when we are in actions like prayer, then alhamdulillah there is a proper connection. So we explained about ihsan, and now towards the end of hadith, this person who we know to be the angel Gabriel, Jibreel alayhi salam, he says, then tell me about the hour. Akhbirni an as-sa'a. Okay? Tell me about the sa'a, which here means the hour. Okay? It's you use the same word sa'a in modern Arabic to mean just tell me the time. Okay, but here, in classical Arabic, classical Quranic Arabic, more often than not always, more often than not, it means the last day in the Quranic religious context. Tell me about the hour. So the Prophet ﷺ said, the one who is questioned about it knows no better than the questioner. No one knows the hour when it's exactly going to come except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. According to what Allah said in the Quran, it is true that elsewhere the Quran says that Allah does not reveal of His... In one set of verses, the Quran says no one knows the ilmul ghayb, the unseen, knowledge of the unseen, except Allah. Then there are other verses, or there's one particular verse that says, and Allah reveals of the ilmul ghayb, of the ilmul ghayb, to those of His servants whom He chooses. Allah reveals of the ilmul ghayb to those of His servants He chooses. So here's an issue of aqeedah, of theology, which comes up with Muslims, and it divides some of us Muslims, and it doesn't have to. There are some Muslims who say the Prophet doesn't have ilm al-ghayb, doesn't have any knowledge of the unseen. Knowledge of the unseen is only with Allah. And they may, if they're clever enough, religious enough, know some of the verses in the Quran, or point to this hadith. Okay, but some verses of the Quran, none knows the ilm al-ghayb except Allah. And so to believe in that, you're going against the Quran. The other side may say, well, actually, you're going against the Quran because Allah says, and He does not reveal of His ilm al-ghayb except to those of His servants that He chooses. And if it's not going to be revealed to the Prophet, who is it going to be revealed to? Since He is Habibullah, Khairu Khalqillah, the best of Allah's creation, the most beloved of Allah's creation, to Allah Jalla wa'ala. So sometimes you'll find people, and this is a real thing, this really happens, you'll find people divided over this issue, so much so that they will accuse each other of deviation in beliefs or even disbelief. But the Quran doesn't contradict each other. One part of the Quran never ever contradicts another part of the Quran. All is from Allah, and Allah doesn't contradict Himself. Allah doesn't trip over His own speech. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not like human beings. There's nothing like Him. He's perfect. So what this means is that in the absolute sense, itlaqan, absolute sense, only Allah knows the unseen. Ilm al-ghayb. Only Allah. What's happening now to that atom 1 trillion miles away, in that star, in that galaxy, right now, and what's happening to every other, only Allah. But Allah has revealed some of His ilm al-ghayb, some of the knowledge of the unseen, about past events, about future events, about some things which in the time of the Prophet were happening there and then. Okay? And Allah revealed to him these things. So if you look at Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, or one of the two, you'll find many examples, but one example that comes to my mind in Sahih Muslim, that one Sahabi said, we prayed Fajr prayer with the Prophet ﷺ, after which he sat us down and he told us about future events. And future events and the fitness, the trials and tribulations, and who would be the source of these trials and tribulations, who will be the fitna makers. He told us the names of the fitna makers, the names of their fathers, the names of the tribes they came from, and he told us all the major fitnas that would come. And then Dhuhr came, we prayed Dhuhr, and afterwards he continued telling the same, more things like that, and Asr came and continued. And one of the Sahabis said, I've forgotten much of it, but whenever things begin to happen, it jogs my memory. You can imagine from say 6 o'clock in the morning to say 6 o'clock in the evening, and he Sallallahu is speaking at a moderate pace, and all he's speaking about now is not rules of Salah and Zakat, it's just about future events. Imagine how much he did tell them. That's just one example. If you go to one of the great Islamic books of heritage, As-Shifa, في تعريف حقوق المصطفى, the cure, the healing in knowing the rights of the chosen one, by the great Spanish scholar Qadi Iyad, or they will say in Urdu Qazi Iyaz. Okay, Qadi Iyad, rahmatullahi alayh. He has a whole chapter. I mean, it's all about the Prophet. It's one of those great books which is why it's called Ash-Shifa, the healing, because it's all about knowing about the Prophet and his rights, his maqam, his station. So that is a healing for the believers, because they take great joy in that. He has a whole chapter on the Prophet's ilm al-ghayb that was given to Allah by him, and he quotes over 100 hadiths. Okay, so we say that yes, Allah has chosen His prophets, and amongst His prophets the Prophet has it the best, and He's given the knowledge of some of the knowledge of ilm al-ghayb. The difference between the Prophet's knowledge of the unseen and Allah's is simple. One is mutlaqan, absolute, which is Allah's, and one is muqayyid, is restricted and confined. One is kulli, complete, and one is juz'i, partial. One is istiqlali, independent, Allah knows it, and He's not taught it, just Allah knows. And one is ata'i, given. The Prophet only knows because Allah revealed it to him. Had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not revealed, he wouldn't know. And you'll find a lot of issues that Muslims argue over. The truth is actually somewhere in the middle. There is a truth from one side and there's a truth from the other, but there's a falsehood from one side and there's a falsehood from the other, and you find that the middle ground, more often than not every time, but a lot of times, one finds that actually when Muslims argue, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, not one of those bits. Anyway, أخبرني عن الساعة. So tell me about the hour. So the Prophet said, the one who's being questioned knows no better than the one who's doing the questioning. So this person said, then tell me about its signs. Then tell me about its amaratiha, its signs. So the Prophet gave two signs here. He said that the slave girl will give birth to her mistress. The slave girl will give birth to her mistress. Let me come back to that in a minute. And the second one, and that you will see the barefooted, naked, destitute herdsmen competing in constructing lofty buildings. Let me retranslate both one of them. So the first one is that the slave girl will give birth to her mistress. Now scholars differ about what this means, and the general opinion of classical scholars is it's saying that parents, mothers in particular, will give birth to those type of children which will lord over them, will not listen to them, will disobey them, will have no ihtiram, honour, respect or service of them. Okay? So that's the majority opinion, that this hadith is saying that actually women will give birth to children who will, instead of listening to their parents, which is the norm, worship Allah and obey your parents is what the Quran says, worship Allah and be kind and dutiful to your parents is what the Quran says in more than one case, then it's a topsy-turvy affair. The children will command and dictate to the parents and and dominate over the parents, and there'll be a lot of uququl walidain, a lot of disobedience to the parents. The Prophet ﷺ says in an authentic hadith in one of the Sahihs, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, he said, "Ala unabbi'ukum bi akbaril kaba'ir? Shall I not tell you of the worst of the major sins? Shall I not tell you the greatest or the worst of the major sins? Bala ya Rasulullah, ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, please do tell us, O Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Al-ishraku billah wa uququl walidain. To associate partners with Allah, to set up rivals with Allah, to make shirk with Allah, and to disobey your parents. And in one authentic narration, not uququl walidain, not disobeying your parents, uququl ummahat, disobeying your mothers. And the reason why mothers have been specified also is because in the authentic hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was asked by someone, who should I respect the most from people, from mankind? Who should I respect the most? He said, your mother. So then he said, then who? He ﷺ said, then your mother. He said for a third time, then who? So for a third time the Prophet ﷺ said, your mother. Then who? Your father. And it's the why is more respect for the mother? Any answers? Why does the Prophet ﷺ tell us to respect our mothers more? Because
she carried you for 9 months.
Absolutely, carried us for 9 months, birthed us in very difficult circumstances, and 9 times out of 10, when children are small and incapable of doing anything themselves, from going to the toilet to putting food in the mouth to illness, 9 times out of 10, it's the mother who has most of the time looking after the children. Well, if that's the case, then surely she must be respected even more because of the life, bi'idhnillah, that she put into it. Of course, it takes 2 to tango, as they say. But the mother. Even if obedience is due to the father because ar-rijal qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa, and men are generally the heads of the house, but the respect, the honor is, subhanallah, the mother put something in that no one else put in. Okay, so here the slave girl will give birth to her mistress, meaning that parents, mothers in particular, will give birth to those people who disobey them and lord over them and dictate to them. And then the second, and so what does that tell us? Topsy-turviness. It should be parents being listened to by children, and children obeying and listening and serving and honouring parents. Now it's become the other way around. And then also the second sign, and you will see the hufatul urat, these barefooted, not naked, scantily clad. They don't have too much clothing. Scantily clad, meaning you don't have much clothes. It's maybe one shirt, maybe not, maybe just some lungi wrapped around you, that's it. No shoes. Okay? So you'll see the barefooted, scantily clad, poor herdsmen, shepherds, competing with each other in building lofty buildings. So the Prophet is saying that things will change. People who used to just be simple farmers or shepherds in the Bedouin in the desert, grazing their camels, grazing their sheep. It doesn't have to be in the desert, but let's start in the Arabian Peninsula. That's kind of a desert thing, or on the outskirts of society. They will one day become so rich that they'll be competing in building lofty buildings. Now, in a pre-modern world, before the modern age, before the 1920s, okay, the only people who used to build big building were people like kings and queens and rulers of countries. Everybody else used to just kind of have a pretty small house. Okay. A sign of building huge buildings is a sign of power and wealth. And power and wealth is not the average man didn't possess that, especially in the pre-modern world. And so the Prophet is saying that these poor, once upon a time Bedouins, shepherds, who walk around barefooted because they don't need to wear any shoes or whatever, and who've just got simple clothing, they will come into somehow so much power and wealth that they will start competing in building tall buildings. Who can build the highest tower? Burj this and this there and that there. Okay, who knows? Again, what that shows is a topsy-turviness. A topsy-turviness. Because generally, the thing about power and wealth, if you've never had it before and it suddenly comes to you, quite often you don't know what to do with it, and it kind of gets to your head, and we tend to do worse things with it. It's like a little child. Little child got no responsibilities, and all of a sudden, if you say, look after the economic budget of the UK, I mean, not that it's looked after very well anyway, but that's besides the point. Then they'll ruin it in a day because I've got £3 trillion. Can buy a few Nike shoes, a few iPods and iPads. The Retina display one has come out, so I can get that 10 times over. I've got loads of doner kebabs as well. Okay, I can renew my Netflix subscription regularly. And that's more or less what it's going to be. Right? They'll be misused because they don't have the mentality. Well, neither do Bedouins and shepherds. But it will come a time when the Prophet will say, you will see that happen. Okay? So, here the Prophet is saying, things towards the end of days, what? The signs of the end of days, a lot of it will be about topsy-turviness. Okay, topsy-turviness. If someone can just hold that in chart for me. So let's go through some more of the signs. He has just given 2 signs, but he's given 2 specific signs and he's given an ishara, an indication. The 2 specific signs is children will start disobeying parents. Okay. And secondly, people who you don't associate with incredible wealth and power will actually be the ones with the greatest wealth and power. And that's normally not the case that you want. So those are the 2 signs, and what's the ishara? That things towards the end of days will get topsy-turvy, turned upside down on their head. Let's go through some of the signs. Not so much with the hadiths. All of these are backed up by hadiths. I'm just going to tell you the sign, okay, and some of them. Our scholars have, according to the hadiths and verses, they've divided the ashratu sa'a, the signs of the final hour, into kubra and sughra, into major signs and lesser signs. They say that the major signs are about 9 or 10 or 11, normally 10, and there's one particular hadith that mentions 10 major signs. And our scholars have said none of those 10 signs, major signs, have happened. Because when they start to happen, they will come quite quickly one after the other, and then that is the end of the world. And there are maybe 30, 40, 50 major, lesser signs. And our scholars say, many of our scholars say, most, if not all, of the lesser signs have already come to pass and are coming to pass as we live. I mean, I can't speak for every scholar in the world, but I can't count on my 2 hands how many of the scholars I've actually sat at the feet with, or how many books I've read about the shuru, the commentary on this hadith, let alone just what other scholars have said there or written there, who haven't said that our age is an age in which all of the lesser signs have nearly all come to pass, or most have come to pass. So let's go through some of these lesser signs. The first one, they generally start off with, is the passing away of the Prophet ﷺ. Because the Prophet ﷺ said in the authentic hadith, بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَسَاءَ كَهَاتَيْنِ, and I and the hour have been sent like this, and he held up his 2 blessed fingers, and he showed how close. Kahatain. Just like these 2 fingers are close, that's how close the Prophet ﷺ is to the final hour. Okay? Then there was a plague of amwas. He said that there will be a plague which will take the lives of many, many people. And that happened in the time, around about the time of the Khilafah, the Caliphate of Uthman radiallahu anhu, thereabouts. Wealth will increase. Obesity, fatness will increase. SubhanAllah. Look at that. I mean, it's not just the Western world, okay? Once upon a time, you could be in Japan, okay? In Japan were small men and small women with small little feet, with small little stomachs. Now the obesity rate in Japan, especially in Japanese children, subhanallah. Japan is like the United States and Saudi Arabia. You've got really grossly overweight people, so many of them. And the reason why is, look at the Japanese diet. After World War II, when they were, because they were on the kind of so-called wrong side, okay, right? After World War II, when they were reconstructing their nation with American help, okay, because they got defeated by the Americans primarily, it became an Americanization of culture. An Americanization of culture means fast food, not all of this, you know, frying healthy food in a wok or something, whatever they have. And it didn't maybe affect the parent, that generation, but the children of that generation. Look at them, it's a serious issue. In this country, obesity counts for tens of millions of pounds of the NHS budget. There are places in the world that are dying of food, but we don't worry about lack of food, dying from lack of food. We worry about dying from obesity. Okay. Now, all that tells you is that, again, people are diving into dunya more than they should. More than they should. So, increase in obesity. The Prophet prophesied the assassination of Uthman radiallahu anhu, which exactly happened. He was assassinated radiallahu anhu. Appearance of an extremist group called the Khawarij. And I don't want to go into it too much, but the Khawarij were those type of extremist Muslims who had certain political views, and then they had some violence to back up their political views. And if the scholars, in this case most of them are the Sahaba, but there were some Tabi'un, if the scholars didn't agree with their views, they would say you're a kafir. Because inil hukmu illa lillah, you don't judge by Allah's judgment. So, and the Prophet said, these Khawarij type of people, they will keep on rising throughout the history of Islam until the last of them will fight alongside the Dajjal against the Muslims. So not in every, but we will always have these groups of extremist, over-politicized Muslims who, even if they don't have exactly the same belief as the Khawarij, but they've drunk from the same cup. They've drunk from the same cup. Okay, their mashrab is one and the same. So the Khawarij will appear. Honesty and trustworthiness will disappear. SubhanAllah, it's common. Religious knowledge will disappear. And someone may say, but no, it's increasing. I would suggest, even if we have satellite TVs and this, that, and the other, I'm wondering how much really is it increasing and how much is it decreasing, and how much just small facts here and there are increasing, but actually the whole proper knowledge is not. Okay? There'll be more women, there'll be an increase in women who are scantily dressed, who aren't dressed modestly. You will end up, you will start giving salams to those you know and not give it to those you don't know. Even though you know they're Muslims. Okay? So what the Prophet is saying, okay? Fitna will increase, wars will increase, corruption will increase. The use of musical instruments will increase. Earthquakes will increase. Famine will increase. There will be, this is an interesting one, there will be an embargo against Iraq. An embargo, meaning, he didn't specify would it be food that is stopped or medicine that is stopped, but what else? How many things can you embargo in the pre-modern world apart from food, medicine? Okay, an embargo. So 1,100 years ago, he said there will be an embargo against Iraq, and subhanallah, even before the Second Gulf War, there was, according to the United Nations, this embargo from medicine and whatever under the rule of Saddam before they went in. Wallahi. time will shrink, and there's some discussion about what that means. Markets will become closer. Again, there's discussion about how will they become closer. One of the contemporary scholars who's passed away, Sheikh Tuwaijiri, rahmatullahi alayhi, in his book on the signs of the last day, he wrote it back in the 60s and 70s. He said what that means is not that markets will be physically close, it's just that markets will be so close because of technology will allow us to know what's going on in one market. And it may not be Walthamstow market and Whitechapel market, it could be international markets. And the stock exchange, who knows? Wallah, it's open to some kind of understanding. The land of the Arabs will return to being green pastures and meadows. There are places now right in the centre of Saudi Arabia which is called the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter where it's so desert-like you can't live, and most people don't live there, where due to modern technologies there are large crop circles of green vegetation because they've been watering certain areas for like 10, 20 years now. And yesterday on BBC News, I didn't even remember this sign, there was this guy, a Jewish guy in Jerusalem or in Jordan. So either in Jerusalem and he's working for Jerusalem and Jordan, or he's in Jordan working for Jerusalem and Jordan. Anyway, some Jewish guy, probably in Jerusalem, not in Jordan. And he is now beginning to say he has genetically modified crops that if you give it only 30% of the water it yields, that it needs, it will yield, it'll have great yields. And the hope is that if the Arab countries can agree, which they don't want to agree because it's Israel, okay, then they can start planting these crops in desert kind of places. Point being is that these things you couldn't even imagine these things in those days. And it may not be these specific forms. Maybe this is not referring to what I'm saying, and we should be careful of matching up the hadith with a particular event 100%, unless the scholars have an agreement about it, or unless there's some clear-cut indication from the book and the sunnah. But we can say that seems to be the case. We can have a kind of dhanni opinion that seems to be. I mean, what else could the embargo be? Wallah, but we always say wallahu a'lam because maybe it is something to come in the future. Okay. Mosques are overly decorated. Female singers will be abundant. Giving false witness under oath will become widespread. Constantinople will be conquered. That happened 800 years after the Prophet. Okay, that happened 800 years after the Prophet. SubhanAllah. And you have others. You have others. The Romans would proliferate and reign supreme. Now the Romans, Rome, is another name for Western Christians. Rome is another name for Christians in the Western Hemisphere. Europe, and which was known to the ancient world, and maybe North America wasn't known, but we could include North America and Europe to be Western Christendom. And the Prophet said they would grow, they would proliferate, and they would reign supreme. So immorality, adultery, fornication will become widespread. And there's more. But that kind of gives you an idea. And our scholars are saying most of them have happened, if not all. And if the ones that haven't happened, they're certainly happening. Now, there are some Muslims, before I get on to the 10 major signs, there are some Muslims who, alhamdulillah, not many of them, who have a triumphalist attitude. So, for example, there is a hadith that says that the Muslims, towards the end of the days, will fight al-Yahud. Okay? The Muslims will fight al-Yahud. So some Muslims say, yeah, well, Prophet said it, so let's start bringing it on now, through haram means or whatever. No. We don't bring on the signs of the Day of Judgment. Just like the Prophet said, and children will disobey parents. We don't say, well, since the Prophet said it, in our madrasas, come here, we'll teach you how to disobey your parents because we have to speed up the end of days. No. We still have to do the opposite. to slow down the negatives. Whatever the negatives are, we work against it, even though it's going to happen, but we still work against it. Lying will become widespread. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to still be truthful, but in the end of the day, it will happen. So we don't speed up anything. Rather than negatives, we work against it. Wars and famine and fitna will happen. We don't add fuel to the fire. We work against it. Okay? So those people who think that, no, actually, you should add fuel to the fire, then they're actually also saying, okay, and I know in Islamic law we have this qaida, this rule, lazimul madhab, laysa bil madhab. The consequence of my opinion is not necessarily my opinion. So there are some people who have said, as an example, oh, since we're going to fight al-Yahud, we should start now and start creating all the chaos and all the things to make it happen. Well, if you take that view, then the consequence of that view, is that you should start teaching children to disobey parents, you should start teaching people to be dishonest, you should start helping female singers to sing, and you should start help women to become even less dressed, because all of these are mentioned. But obviously people who hold the first opinion about starting wars, of course they don't mean to do these things, but it is a case of the consequence of your views should, which is, and you wouldn't agree with it, should tell you your initial view is wrong as well. You can see the logic, you can see where your logic leads to, and you can see how wrong it is, then you should know that what led to the logic in the first place is wrong. Okay? But look at what's happening. And just one more thing about this thing about the Romans will become proliferate and reign supreme. In Sahih Muslim, there is a saying of Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu anhu, and he was asked about it. He gave this hadith, he's the narrator of this hadith, and he said that these Romans, they have 5 qualities, they have 4 qualities for what makes them exceptional, what makes them really good. And this is the 4 qualities he said. That they are the most forbearing in times of fitna, in times of trials and tribulation. Most forbearing, meaning they're the most patient, and they don't start losing their head and shouting and screaming and wailing and like that. They're just like subdued a bit and they get on with whatever they need to fix of fitnas, of calamities, of earthquakes, of trials and tribulations. That's one thing he said. He said the second, they are the quickest to recover from calamities. Thirdly, they are the best of the people towards the poor and the needy. And fourthly, they are the best to stand up to the tyranny and the injustices of their kings and their rulers. You might feel, that kind of describes more or less some of the qualities that we see prevalent amongst some of these non-Muslims as well. Anyway, so those were some of the more important minor signs of the Day of Judgment. And each one of them is a problem. Lying will be widespread, ignorance will increase, trustworthiness. You could hardly find a man who is trustworthy. Okay. And trustworthiness in Sharia, in common language we have an idea what trustworthy means. You trust me with something, I break your trust. You trust me with a secret, I tell others. You trust me to stand guard of the house and I let people in. You make me take a promise and I break it. Then that shows that I'm not trustworthy, for example. But also the idea of trustworthiness in terms of adala, how you are just, slightly different than trustworthiness, but it's related. We need to be careful. The Prophet said, there is no nikah except with a wali and shahidei adli, and 2 just witnesses, 2 other witnesses. Now I don't want to get into the fiqh issue of the Hanafis and the rest of the 3 madhabs on is the wali shart sihat nikah, is it a condition for the correctness of the nikah, or is it just something which is recommended, encouraged, but it's not a condition, leaving that. But the shahidei adli, 2 just male witnesses. Our scholars have said, since about, from what I remember in the books, 800 years ago, 900 years ago, maybe even longer than that, I don't know, wallah, they said, it used to be that you go to any small town or any small village and you would find 10, 20 just Muslim men who had adala, justness according to the Islamic standard. I'll explain what justness is in a minute. But then there came a time where you could go into any town or village and it would be hard pressed to find even one just man. Now, of course, the Prophet said 2 just men have to be are a condition for the marriage. And the scholars are saying, we're living in a time now when we're going to most of these villages, cities and towns, and we can't even find one. Then the scholars, this is where, through their knowledge, and it has to come from them, not us. It has to come from them, not us. And when we talk about scholars, we're not talking about scholars who just have the book knowledge, but scholars who are muttaqi, and people of wara, people who are very pious, and they're very, they don't easily bend the rule. They have wara, they are scrupulous. So if this thing is, maybe it's halal, it's haram, maybe, khalas, I'm keeping away from it. Not well, it's not clearly haram, is it, so I can have it. That's not their thing is, maybe, and I'll keep away from it. That's how judicious, careful they are. So they said that, of course, if we can't find 2 just witnesses, do we say that we cannot perform a marriage and therefore leave all of these young men and women unmarried because you can't find 2 just witnesses? The nikah, la nikah illa bi wali wa shahiday adli. La nikah illa bi wali wa shahiday adli. There's no nikah except in the presence of a wali and 2 male just witnesses. They said, no, we can't have that because here are 2 evils. One evil is that we don't fulfill the words of the Prophet, 2 just witnesses. That's an evil. And the other evil is that we'll have thousands and thousands of young men and women not getting nikah. And if they don't get nikah, they're not going to just be sitting at home doing dhikr. They're young men and young women. Something's going to happen in society and it's not going to be good. So they said, due to the lesser of the 2 evils, أخف الضررين, lesser of the 2 harms. So this is a Sharia principle that our scholars use. Lesser of the 2 harms. If we can't find 2 just witnesses, we'll get any male witnesses. And that's the position today. You'll never find a scholar examining the 2 just witnesses to say they're just. And how do we work out adala? Though there is a difference of opinion between our classical scholars, most of them have said this. Adala is someone who, a man has adl, and he has adala, if he is free of major sins. Major sins. And if he does minor sins, sagha'ir, he doesn't have israr. There's no israr, he doesn't repeatedly do minor sins. It's just one of it happened. And then he makes tawbah, one of it happened. And he's almost free. It's hardly, you look at his life and it's most of it, 90%, 80% is just purely obedience to Allah and fulfilling the wajib, fara'id and keeping away from the muharramat. SubhanAllah. Without upsetting or scaring anyone, it's even hard to find an alim like that today. I mean, there are ulama like that, and the ulama are the best of people. The ulama who are awliya are definitely the best of people, and then the ulama who are not awliya, inshallah, they're from the best of the people. So I don't want to scare you to think that the ulama, they're, mashallah, Allah protects them. But it's still difficult to find loads and loads of ulama like that, let alone the normal, common people. Keeping away from all the major sins, or most of the major sins, just 1 or 2 come in and make tawbah for it. So actually you'll find that if we went back into some time machine, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and we lived amongst some of the great scholars, if we went back into a time machine to early Islam, and we were in front of Imam Abu Hanifa or Imam Malik, radiallahu anhuma, and they somehow, they kind of questioned us about how we live our lives, whatever, we would be considered fusaq, sinners and transgressors, not people of adl. So there is tabdeel, there is change in every age, no doubt. So just to kind of be aware that there are scholarly principles that are used to deal with these emergency situations. Right, okay. What are the major signs? So the major signs. There is one particular hadith that sums up more or less what the major signs. The kubra, the major signs of the final hour, the major signs of the hour, they are ashara. There are 10 signs. And they tend to follow on one after another in quite rapid succession. Whereas the minor signs, it's been 1400 odd years since the Prophet ﷺ, and he's the first of the major signs. 800 years after his ﷺ passing away, the minor sign of conquering of Constantinople. We are now at a stage where female singers have proliferated just across the globe, not just in one area or one whatever. And we're now in an age in which we are more fearing obesity ever before, even in other countries, than we fear poverty. Okay, so minor signs do take back. Major signs come, they topple like dominoes. So in the hadith of Hudayfa, in the hadith of Hudayfa ibn Asyad, so it's not Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman. He says, the Prophet said, "Inna sa'a la takunu hatta takunu ashru ayat." The last hour will not come until 10 signs first appear. خَصْفٌ فِي الْمَشْرِقِ وَخَصْفٌ فِي الْمَغْرِبِ وَخَصْفٌ فِي جَزِيرَةِ الْعَرَبِ. Landslides, like when the land caves in. It's not necessarily earthquakes, but earthquakes do cave in the land as well, where, you know, big gaping holes in the ground. Landslides in the west, in the east and in the west, and in the Arabian Peninsula. Jaziratul Arab just means that part which is now we call Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait and Bahrain, leaving the Yemen traditionally. So because it's a peninsula, 3 sides is surrounded by water and 1 side is land. Okay, that's called Jaziratul Arab. So the Jazeera TV is referring to that old name of Arabia, Jaziratul Arab. Okay, that even before the process, it used to be called Jaziratul Arab, the Arabian Peninsula. So there will be landslides in the east and the west in the Arabian Peninsula. We're talking about huge ones, okay? وَالدُّخَانِ, which the Quran mentions, the smoke. وَالدَّجَّالِ, the Antichrist. وَالدَّابَةُ الْأَرْضِ, the beasts of the earth, again mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf, yeah? Yeah, دَابَةُ الْأَرْضِ. يَعْجُوجَ and مَعْجُوج, Gog and Magog. طُلُوعُ الشَّمْسِ مِنْ مَغْرِبِهَا, the sun rising, not from the east, but from the west. وَالنَّارُ تَخْرُجُ مِنْ قَعْرَ عَدْنٍ تَرْحَلُ النَّاسِ, and a fire that drives the people. And this fire originates in Yemen, and one narration it says in Syria. وَنُزُولُ عِيسَى ibn Maryam, and the descent of Jesus on Maryam. So basically, when landslides start happening, really huge ones, including in the Arabian Peninsula, when Dajjal comes, when Isa fights and destroys him, when this smoke and these beasts of the earth and Gog and Magog will come, and in one hadith it says, Gog and Magog, they're like in Surah Al-Kahf, they are imprisoned by a wall, wherever that is, and there is a hole in there, and Gog and Magog, either 1, 2 single creatures or groups of creatures, so it's open to interpretation, somehow get passed through that wall now. Gog and Magog will come, and they'll be huge. Oh, and their faces will be like shields, because their noses will be flat and the eyes will be. You know, if you take a doll, like an action figure, and you push the nose down, something like that, it becomes shielded. Like it becomes a little bit like Mongolian featured. But I didn't want to use any particular country because I don't want to state the fact, or I don't want to state it as a fact. But their faces will be like that, and they'll come across a huge vat of water, huge kind of like ocean of water, and they will just consume it just like that. In another hadith, the Euphrates, okay, you know, the Nile and the Euphrates coming out of Iraq, one of the great ancient rivers of ancient civilization, the Euphrates will start vomiting up gold, coughing up gold, and people will race with each other to grab some of that gold. And the Prophet said, if you are in that time, do not go for the gold, because 99 out of 100 people will die because of it. So keep away from that fitna. Okay, just like he said, when the Dajjal comes, don't go to him. Don't say, oh, let me check it out so I can get like a little picture and put it on my Facebook, you know, and let's make it. Don't go there. If you know that the Dajjal is there, go the other way. Don't think that we're so strong in the Iman that we can take it on. So look at the benefit of not having knowledge of this. If we know it, and God forbid if we live to that time, and then someone says, you know what, credit crunch over. Just get a flight out to Euphrates, get your little digging equipment, and you come back with some gold. It will be like the gold rush of the 1880s or 1850s in some parts of America. And the Prophet said, don't do it. Because it will be a calamity and there will be no khayr. But the thing is, knowledge is decreasing. Okay? All we want to hear from our scholars, Ya Shaykh, how many tried to make another thing halal for us? That was halal. We like scholars like that. We like scholars like that. And if they don't do it, we complain to each other. There's some strict scholar, he doesn't know. But if I come and say, yes, riba okay, yes, sex after marriage okay, yes, a little bit of alcohol, don't have it too much, but now and again, yes, this okay, yes, this. You say, oh, but I'm a big sheikh, you'll be on the throne. Right? So actually, we have a lot of responsibility in not destroying the reputation of the scholars. You know, when I was young, I used to hear these scholars, and I still have some sheikhs. I have some sheikhs, some teachers who they will never come in front of a camera. And we used to say to them, yeah, sheikh, not for a photograph, just so that you can give a talk, and then we record it on DVD, and then we get other people. They said, but you can record it on voice, on audio. But yeah, sheikh, it would be nice because you just listen and you watch it. Because no, they say no. And I used to think, just like many of the people of my age, that's a bit strict, isn't it? But then I think to myself, because we have allowed images, for good reasons as well as bad, definitely you can put images and videos to good use, okay, no doubt at all. But actually, go to that place where it is the home of the visual media, the internet. There's audio things on there, but mostly it's visual video. It's video content. What is the majority of the internet filled with? We don't even like to mention the word, but it begins with P. Right? Pornographic stuff is the majority video content on the internet, and has been almost since its birth. Close to 70%, 60% of websites are pornographic sites. That's by non-Muslim standards. We'd probably say 99% are pornographic if you take it by Sharia standards. But just by normal Western standards, that's it. And so maybe if we didn't have that video, if all those scholars who were strict and that became our way, maybe the world wouldn't be as bad a place. The difference is, I would only have to listen to the sheikhs talk through hearing, not seeing. But hey, so what I'm trying to say is, I'm disagreeing with those sheikhs who allow it, because there are sheikhs who do allow it, and they say if there is a benefit. So I'm not getting into that issue. All I'm saying is, sometimes when we think some scholars are very strict, maybe it's not that they're strict, maybe they have a deeper insight for long-term affairs that Allah has inspired them with. Who knows? What I'm trying to say is that be careful of us judging our ulama, thinking that they're being not reasonable, because you might find that Allah has given them more hidayah, more basira than you and me. And that's not unusual. Wouldn't come as a surprise that our scholars are more rightly guided than we'll ever be, because these are people of ilm and ibadah, and they have a sila with Allah, a connection with Allah. And I'm talking about scholars in the right sense, not in the sense that people call me Shaykh Abu Ali, but really I'm just a talibul ilm. Okay, even though I've been studying for 20 years, but 20 years is pretty nothing. Okay, it's pretty nothing when you know. I'm talking about people who have, not just memorize Quran, but they just have so much deep knowledge. Those are really what we call scholars. Otherwise, it's fine. Someone calls me Shaykh or whatever. This is kind of, you get that, inshallah ta'ala. But when I talk about ulama, try not to think of ulama that he's done 6 years in a Darul room. He's an alim. But I'm talking about someone much more seasoned than that. And we have people like that, although they will decrease in number. So let me finish by saying that the minor signs tell us things will be topsy-turvy. The Prophet said in the authentic Hadith, there will soon come a time in which the trustworthy one will be judged to be treacherous, and the treacherous one will be judged to be trustworthy. And the Ruwaybida will have a say. He said, who are the Ruwaybida? The Prophet said, the lowly, rubbish-like people who will speak about public affairs. The lowly people who have no worth, who have no merit, who have no fadail, but they will speak about public affairs. And here we are. We speak about affairs that affect the ummah, and not only do we not even understand much politics, we don't have the Sharia to back it up, even if we did. And it's not, we're talking about little things in the house, we're talking about, oh yeah, this should happen and that should happen, and the scholars are, we know better. What do we know? How many of us have really studied political science? How many of us are over 60, 70 and have acutely watched the news? How many of us know the underpinning philosophical foundations of Western modernity to know what animates and motivates that? And then, if any of us do know all of that, how many of us have that type of scholarly knowledge of Sharia, that we can bring the two together? Because that's what's needed for a fatwa on an issue. So it is frightening times, and what this should make us do is, it should make us feel, Ya Allah, this is a tornado. This, whatever is to come is going to be metaphorically a tornado, not destroying homes and farms, destroying souls and hearts and iman. Illa man rahima rabbuk, except those people whom Allah has mercy upon. None of us are going to be safe from these violent winds of trials, tribulations, fitnas, mayhem. None of our iman will be safe. Let alone from the Dajjal. Leaving the Dajjal, let alone lesser than it, except if we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to know that this is the time in which things have changed. The scholar is the one who has 2 or 3 people in his circle. And the young student, or the one who hasn't even studied, he's just learned his knowledge from the internet, is the one who has 1,000 people around him. The scholar is the one who, in our masjid, the hafiz is the one who, because he's now got married, he's got 3 children, and he has to move out to the 1-bedroom house that he's been living in for 5 years. And he says to me, the manager of the masjid, Mr. President, could you just, £1.50 extra, £1 an hour extra? Brother, don't get greedy. But I'm the same Mr. President who, when I invite Jack and Jill in my house to teach my children ABC 1, 2, 3, do, re, mi, okay? They'll say £15 an hour, and I say, oh, that's very cheap, I'll give you £20 an hour. But someone who's teaching my children Iman, okay, and I don't want to give him anything because, just give him not even minimum wage, worse than minimum wage. And how do we do that? That shows how much I respect you. So look at the topsy-turviness in the sense that, how much do I know about Man City, Man U? I can tell you all the transfers of the last 10 years, right? I can tell you the latest, I can compare Samsung versus Apple in all of its specs, right? But you ask me, tell me the stories of 3 or 4 prophets in the Quran in very loose terms. Forget about the stories, I don't even know their names. Right? I don't even know their names. Okay? And we're not talking about, and when people hear this, people think, oh, I'm talking about young children. Young children, including elders, are like this. And it's worse when we're 35, 40, we have little white hairs in our hair, and I am that religiously ignorant. It's understandable when a young man or woman drifts. There are so many things that it's understandable, but not accepted as an excuse. We understand it, but it's still not an excuse. But it's neither understandable and also even not excusable that elders We do. So, and then the process, and just to finish it, some days pass. We don't know it from this hadith, but the hadith in the Sunan of Nasai said 3 days passed with this majlis. Everyone went away. 3 days later, the process comes upon Umar radiallahu anhu, somewhere in the streets of Medina maybe, and said, do you know who the questioner was? Because the questioner came, asked the questions, and as he mysteriously came, he mysteriously went. Do you know who the questioner was? And Umar radiallahu anhu says, Allah wa Rasuluhu a'lam. Allah and His Prophet knows best. Innahu Jibreel. That was the angel Gabriel. Ataakum yu'allimukum deenakum. He came to teach you your religion. Allah sent him very close to the passing away of the Prophet ﷺ to sum up 23 years worth of teachings in 5-10 minutes or however long the sitting took with the 3 questions. So that Iman, beliefs, Aqidah. Iman, beliefs, Aqidah, or to give it a nice scholarly term, theology. Iman is Aqidah, beliefs, creed. Islam is fiqh, law. Halal, haram, lawful, prohibited. This is allowed, this is not allowed, this is recommended, this is disliked. Ihsan is the inward purification of the heart. Tazkiyah, suluk, tasawwuf, whatever we want to call it, that inward spiritual purification. And it is the beliefs, the practices, the do's and don'ts, the prayer, fasting, that outward obligations, the beliefs, the practices and the spirituality, put them 3 together, that is deen. There are obligations that we have to know in Aqeedah,